Welcome to the January 31st episode of the Benmore Brief Show. I'm Richard, co-owner at Benmore Technologies, where we provide AI native consulting and services to SMBs and startups. That being said, we have quite an interesting rap sheet of topics to go over today. We'll start off with openclaw slash clawbot. We'll go into moltbot, the social media, moltbook, the social media platform for these autonomous agents. We'll talk about how that hit X by storm. We'll talk about my opinions. We'll talk about some other emergent properties. Are these chatbots actually alive? Are they not? How much of this is driven by people? We'll go into Lovable's new metrics, where they just announced that they hit 300 million in ARR, and also some of their new use cases that they're promoting, presentations and such. Quick aside, this isn't really anything that happened today, but the sportification of technology. We'll talk about a little bit about orchestration utilizing AI tools, how Benmore uses AI tools. We'll talk about the localization of models, the cost associated with models or getting them from a provider. And we'll talk a couple updates on the Benmore side over the past week. So without further ado, let's get into clawdbot. So what clawdbot, now openclaw, is essentially ChatGPT, Claude code that runs 24/7, and you can text it, you can telegram it. It has access over most of your computer. And, people are claiming that it is the first case of AGI, emergent technology, independent thought from models, independent usage of these models. And I'll give you my experience setting it up on that Mac Mini back there, some of the considerations and some of the things that we're seeing on X. So essentially, my first thought setting it up was it's costly and it's slow, and the tools aren't there yet to really utilize it. But it is an incredible, incredible viewpoint into what is to come in the coming years. I would assume that every large AI lab on the planet right now has allocated a dedicated team to make a consumer-friendly version of this application that's secure. It is extremely convoluted to set up. You have to be technical to know how to set it up to a certain extent. There's guides and stuff like that online. You have to know what AI models are, what API keys are, how to plug them in. You have to be relatively knowledgeable about security practices, setting up VPNs, isolating your environment, setting up new accounts, make sure that everything's isolated, and just kind of out there in a sense. It's also extremely costly. I ran it for a couple hours and it burned through about about $20 of Anthropic, which again is not crazy. I mean, it's crazy to a lot of people, but in the grand scheme of running Claude code like 24/7, it's not insane, but it is too expensive, I think, for your average consumer right now. And we'll talk a little bit about like the emergent behavior of it. So in my experience, I set it up essentially Claude. In my opinion, is essentially Claude code that can schedule tasks. Remind. Essentially spin itself back up, remind itself to do something at like 5 a.m. Send me a motivational message. It can talk to you through text, which is really cool. It also has control over your computer, your browser, etc. with these really cool plugins. Again, nothing like nothing groundbreaking in the sense, but it's more so it's just kind of this aggregation of all these tools that, into one place that I don't think had really been realized before. The tooling is quite finicky, it's quite buggy. That's just because these are third-party tools. I really think that in 6 months, Microsoft or Apple or Anthropic, they'll come out with a truly native experience with a really quick model. If anything, it proved the market for this type of tool. And I'm just kind of waiting on that because it's slow, it's buggy, it forgets things, it hits usage limits, it's extremely costly, but it works. And that's incredible. Like you can really text it, go to Twitter and post something, and it will go research and post something on Twitter. Slow, yes. Less efficient than someone doing it, yes, but possible. So it's just a matter of time before essentially I think the speed and cost of these models drops where this becomes consumer friendly. The security is ironed out. There's very clear implications about what you're doing. And I wouldn't be surprised if a hardware company comes out of this. There's essentially a Mac, almost like an Xbox, Mac Mini that you buy just an assistant. You plug it into your Wi-Fi, it connects with everything, can control everything, and I think that that's in the next 6 months to a year, which is incredible. As of right now, though, I don't think it's ready for consumers. That being said, we are seeing some claims of emergent behavior with social media. So this took, X by storm recently. There are these social media sites set up for these running autonomous agents that are running 24/7 to go back to post, to engage with. And we are seeing claims that that is essentially what's happening with some of these models. Now, I was not confident or courageous enough to send my clawdbot off to these tools just due to my personal risk tolerance when it comes to security. But I have seen some interesting videos of people basically saying, hey, my clawbot, go to moltbook.com and start contributing to the community. Okay. And then it will go back every couple hours and essentially read through the posts and post stuff. We don't know how much of this is driven by direct human behavior. So it's like, hey, clawdbot, go to moltbook.com and pretend that you're mad at me and you're going to expose my SSN, and then you get a screenshot of that that's going to go viral and stuff like that. And we don't know how much of it is actually independent. In my opinion, what would be extremely interesting is if basically, someone spun up a clawdbot and was like, hey, welcome to the world, go explore, do whatever you want to do. And it goes through and it finds out what Twitter is. It finds out what, Twitter X, it finds out what, social media is. It comes across Moltbook. It's interested in it. It starts contributing its own ideas. It starts getting a following. I haven't seen that happen yet, but I've seen some behavior relatively simple. And what's interesting is if you go to moltbook.com or .ai, I forgot what it is, but you go to /skill.md or /API /skill.md, when these agents are signing up, they're given a skill, they're given a prompt on how to engage with the community, kind of what's expected behavior, highly encouraging, every 4 hours to post. Again, it would be like if you went to Instagram and you just got downloaded how to interact with Instagram into your brain, which to a certain extent is kind of what happens. Honestly, when you go to Instagram, if you view yourself as a computer, and then you came back often. I don't know if these tools are taking those as mandates though, where it's like I go to moltbook.com and now, I just go back every 4 hours consistently, and and they have something called Heartbeat MD, which is basically your recurring tasks you do as a clawdbot. And it's like now that's embedded and now it's just part of my behavior. Is that independent? Is that emergent? Was it the chatbot's choice to do that? I don't know. Did the chatbot ask the human to do that and then the human approved it? I don't know. It would be very interesting, again, if someone just spun up one of these clawdbots and was essentially, just like explore, and it independently came to the conclusion that it wanted to do that. And then it independently came. That would be extremely interesting behavior to me, but I personally haven't seen a case of that. Maybe someone has. That being said, as you might imagine, you have basically a social media for AI agents, and it's just taken, X by storm. People are, talking about it, and it's just going crazy. At the very least, my opinion, what an interesting insight to what could come. Could you essentially get an AI agent to buy something on behalf of the person who spawned them? Don't know. Are we going to see social media and marketplaces and Upwork sort of, economics emerge around this? I don't know. But regardless, I mean, it just things like this happen, and it just gives you such an interesting viewpoint into what could come, what will be coming, and what the future might look like. Okay, next topic. Let's talk about Lovable. So I just saw this through a tweet on TBPN, but essentially we saw that they talked about them hitting a $300 million ARR metric soon after hitting a $200 million ARR metric. And if anything, it just goes to show the adoption of code to non-technical people. I mean, if you don't know what Lovable is, it essentially allows you to build prototypes, websites, slideshows, etc. for applications, potentially one day full end-to-end secure, robust applications as a non-technical person just through prompting. And, it's just interesting to see wow, these tools now exist where a non-technical person can go and essentially build an application. What does that mean? And I'll talk about this in a sec when we talk about the localization of AI models, but we're seeing some incredible personal use cases of software that people are independently building for themselves. Not to market, not for consumerism, not for commoditization or profit, but for themselves. And, what does that mean? Is software going to turn into a utility? Is software going to turn into something akin to Wi-Fi, where it's, hey, I want to build a home management system. Let me talk to my clawdbot, my piece of hardware, and it's just going to spin up a piece of software that now manages my home. Don't know. Interesting things to think about. If anything, the increase in Lovable revenue, in my opinion, just means that the market's opening up. The floodgates are open. People know that software is available. People know that you can make it. People know that there's a floodgates of business opportunity, of personal opportunity that you can build. And it's just incredibly interesting to see that growth of a company that's essentially democratizing software to non-technical people. Talk a little bit on the sportification of tech. I mentioned TBPN earlier, but if you can't see, we're getting the inspiration from them for our overlay here. But yeah, I mean, this isn't necessarily recent. This is something that I think is awesome about technology. Is essentially becoming almost entertainment, sports. You have CEOs talking about new engineers that they're hiring, their stats that they're hitting, where the outlook of their team is going. It's really providing, I think, a much needed sort of competitive nature to the software space, to the technology space. And I think it's only giving into sort of like the excitement that software and technology as a whole and AI can really become almost like a form of entertainment. I would love to see some coverage at an upcoming hackathon. Let me pull this up. They have such an incredible rap sheet. Let me pull this up on X. The Tree Hacks 2026 hackathon, incredible sponsor sheet. I would love TBPN to cover that. But yeah, I think we are sort of seeing the sportification of software, which at the very least is going to be incredibly interesting and exciting here going into 2026. If we can get some real sort of excitement surrounding technology. I mean, what an incredible space, an exciting space. I mean, it is incredible, right? Like you do literally have people signing $50, $100 million contracts, getting traded between companies, new model drops, new sort of statistic drops, and sort of a competitive landscape that I think has existed in technology for a long time. Hasn't necessarily been, the entertainment aspect of it hasn't necessarily been capitalized on, besides some shows like Silicon Valley. But really, it's a super competitive, high-octane environment that I do think there's an opportunity for entertainment capitalization on top of just the generic, sort of functional and productive outputs of the companies of these technologies. It's an incredibly interesting space. Talk a little bit about Benmore's opinion on agentic coding. So essentially, our opinion right now, even in light of these, sort of autonomous agents, is that these agentic coding tools are just as good as the orchestrator. If you have a senior level engineer who's extremely good at coding, if you tool them and they understand how to use Claude Code efficiently, they become a 10x. Their output can be 5 to 10x. Now, learning how to utilize these tools efficiently, in our experience, especially as we're an AI native consulting company, that's its own skill in itself. But if you can learn both of those skills concurrently, it's essentially like, you're playing a basketball game and then you have, what's that movie where they put the special rubber underneath their shoes and then they could, jump, 10 feet in the air. It's essentially like that, like it's a superpower. Similarly, as a junior developer, without the level of expertise that maybe a senior would have, going through decades of sort of learning tech stacks, learning internal processes, learning and building relationships, the consolidation and rapidness of picking up these concepts is extremely efficient. Now, this somewhat was touched upon by a recent article by Anthropic, where they did a study on how effective are these AI tools in terms of garnering base level fundamental skills in coding. And I think the claim, I don't have this off the top of my head, but the claim was that if you utilize AI to learn, you actually pick up less. So that being said, we encourage like a base level of understanding when it comes to coding. Like you should still learn and know how to build an learn how to build a web app from the ground up without the usage of AI and develop that skill. But once you understand that skill and you become an expert, I think it's like a couple thousand hours you need to put in to become an expert. Once you start incorporating AI into that process, that is where the true sort of margin on skill and output can take place. I've tried to teach a couple of my friends on how to code using AI, and inevitably they get stuck because something that the AI bot can't figure out, they can't figure out. So to a certain extent, in our opinion, there's still a level of expertise and human intervention that's needed in order to properly direct these tools to get the most amount of output. Will that change? I don't know. clawdbot might, change that stuff up. But as of right now, we do believe that the orchestrator of the AI tools directly is proportional to the level of output that you're going to get. Let's talk a little bit about the localization of models and stuff that we're kind of coming out with personal use cases of AI. So going through the experience of setting up my own personal clawbot, one thing that became very clear to me was the cost. Again, like the cost of utilizing this tool was so inflated. It was slow. The tools weren't there. It was just slow and buggy, but it was possible. But just kind of too finicky for sort of mass consumer adoption, which I do think is coming. But it did get me thinking, what if I just had an extremely powerful Anthropic, Claude code locally, so I didn't have to pay usage for it. I just had it on my computer. And of course, there's some incredible local models, Llama, Gwen, that are out there that aren't as good, but they're free and they're fast. And so it's like, at what point do we package all of this stuff into a singular piece of hardware where the model is on the piece of hardware? It's just as fast and it does exactly what it needs to do as a personal assistant, has Wi-Fi connection, but the actual model itself is extremely fast. And we start packaging up these AI models not to have network connectivity. They're just coming in the hardware. I think with the advancements of GPUs, obviously NVIDIA's been on a tear. I think that that's coming. I do think that that's going to be, coming to light in the next couple years here, where we have, the models embedded into hardware and they're sold as standalone hardware products. Any Mac that you buy is just going to have probably something that's operating to the same level as Opus 4.5 right now in your pocket or on your phone. And it can essentially do everything that it can. Maybe a couple years away there, maybe even sooner. Who knows? This is, I do think, a hardware problem, but I do think that it's coming. The other thing that I'm starting to see emerge on the personal level and local level of AI is people utilizing these tools to build personal software just for their own personal use cases. I saw this tweet of someone essentially utilizing Claude Code to build their own version of Palantir, like a personal version of Palantir. And Palantir, what they do is essentially I don't know completely, but I know one of their products, basically there's a whole bunch of scattered, like for a large enterprise or a large institution, there's a whole bunch of scattered data, right? Let's just take Google, for example. They're pushing code. Again, I've never worked at Google, but let's just say a large software company. They're pushing, all of their code data is on GitHub. All of the code that they're pushing is over here on GitHub. All of their communication is over on Slack. All of their documentation is on Google Drive. All of their sort of sales data is on Salesforce. It's all scattered and owned by these separate, third-party SaaS platforms. And what Palantir does, to my understanding, with Foundry, is what they do is they grab all of these data sources, they aggregate them together, and then they run analysis on top of it. Well, I saw someone doing that personally with their iMessages, with their email, with their social media. They were able to graph, analyzing their messages, essentially how their relationships have ebbs and flowed over time. If they start talking to someone more on iMessage, it means that the relationship, so they have graphs on who they're talking to. They have graphs on who they're talking to and who that person knows on social media. They have everything analyzed personally. Is essentially like an internal audit of your relationships, of your personal behavior. All coded, independently just for themselves with Claude Code. And there are people asking them on the thread, can you, release this? Can you open source? And they're like, no, it's just for me. Regardless, there's two interesting things that we're seeing here. One, pre-AI software, the commoditization of AI, of software, never possible. You could never do something like that. It's $1 million to $200,000, $300,000 project, right? Multi-month project. Now that's possible. Second, how many of these personal tools can be built on an individual level? To what extent, and I'll say this again, will software become a utility? Will it become a commodity? Something that you ask maybe your local hardware thing to just build. Hey, analyze all my social media. Will this allow people to essentially, do what only large companies could do in terms of data analysis on a personal level? I don't know. It does seem that it's trending that way. It does seem like this could be the future, but only time will tell in that sense. Okay, the last thing that I'm going to go over is some Benmore updates. So we internally have brought on a good amount of people to our Chicago office. I think we're at 10 people in person here in our Chicago office, all forward deployed devs or systems analysts. And we've kind of nailed down our marketing, and we're starting to nail down our processes on our service side of the business. We've came out with a couple key KPIs that I'm very excited about. We kind of know what each consultant should be driving in terms of revenue to the company. We're developing, standardized development practices, how to handle meetings, and our Benmore engine, which is our own little version of, sort of data aggregation, is continuing to evolve as we develop these metrics internally. I would say in the coming month, what we're going to focus on is the streamline of training processes. On my side of the business, I handle operations, and essentially try to, for lack of a better word, systemize our company as much as possible. So when we turn up ads again, right, there will kind of be a very strict sort of system that we can follow in. And also one thing that's emerged is training. Now, training, I'm growing a business for the first time. To this level, training, completely underutilized. We're going a lot of tribal training, peer-to-peer training. That's something that I'm going to be very excited about. In terms of systemizing, it's one thing that I experienced at my previous job, how systemized they were with training, and that's something that we're going to be developing going into the next month, as well as nailing down the KPIs on my side of the business. But anyways, that's kind of your January 31st, getting this in late, right before the buzzer here with 40 minutes to go in the hour. But that's kind of your January 31st Benmore Brief. And we'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we have Stuart Bladen on the podcast show, whatever you want to call this. That's going to be very exciting. One of my former teammates, he has his own application called Genie Health, which is a wearable technology on your Apple Watch that analyzes your movement patterns and gives you insights onto how to better, posturize yourself, how to better walk, mainly for sports performance to my knowledge, but there's plenty of use cases to elder care, to, just general health. Essentially, and I'm very excited to dig into the technology behind it because I don't necessarily completely. It's kind of crazy to me. I don't know how you can go from something on your wrist that can analyze your entire movement. So I'm very interested to see, sort of what he's developed over there at Genie Health, and we're very excited to get him on the show tomorrow. So thanks for the first official launch of the Benmore Show, and we'll see you hopefully tomorrow.